Hello everybody, welcome back to the Pokemon Review series. In this episode we're going over this cute little bugger, the Mimikyu. Mimikyu, ghost type, pretty typical of ghost types. It has the dozing sleep type. And Mimikyu's got a skill specialty, and it is a very interesting skill specialist in this game. It is one of only two Pokemon currently in the game that has a Berry Burst variant for its skill, that being Disguise Berry Burst. And I actually talked about a bunch of Mimikyus relatively recently on my Reviewing Your Pokemon series before going over Mimikyu in this series. I'll link that in description, but it was Ben Brown's Mimikyus, and I went over a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about in here, and actually probably a little more in depth than what I'm going to talk over here. So if you want more to learn about this little guy, I will recommend that video, but I'll go over some of the base stuff with Mimikyu because it is a very interesting Pokemon, and I do want to discuss it because it's a very weird Pokemon and what it's trying to do. So, it's got an ingredient rate of 15.3%. That's pretty low, but doesn't really matter on a skill specialist. And a 3.3% skill trigger rate. That is a little bit low, which, that's on the lower end as far as skill specialist goes. Not the worst in terms of skill trigger rates. It's not like the Legends, but that is a pretty significantly lower one, which means that this guy is going to benefit less from main skill trigger skills and more from, well, the same from helping speed skills. So speed matters more on a Mimikyu than skill trigger comparatively. I'd still say triggers matter the most, but help speed M is way more valuable than skill trigger S on this guy because of the effective pity procs with having this low of a skill trigger rate. It's a 16-pip Pokemon, which is very notable. I typically don't recommend hunting for 16-pip Pokemon, and I would say that applies to the Mimikyu as well, but if you catch a really good one, it's got potential. 4140 speed is that's on the faster end of things. And a 19 inventory. Now, 19 inventory is a bit small for a skill specialist, especially for a single stage, but if you have an inventory sub-skill or you sleep within enough hours, you can mitigate that quite a bit. But then, yeah, now, what is it that the Mimikyu does? Now, Mimikyu, it's got a very interesting skill being Disguise Berry Burst. It just drops a number of berries whenever it procs of its own berries, and then a little bit from the rest of the team. So, or from the other teammates that it's sharing the team with. As you can see at level 6, which is the current max for it, 21 is how many of its own berries that it produces, and then 5 from each teammate. So 21 of its own berries, and then 20 from the team, because there's 4 teammates, 5 from each teammate as well. And there's also a chance that it'll produce a mega hit, a big hit. It's got a really cool animation, and it's very cute, honestly. And it can only do that once between each sleep session. So if you nap, you might get more value out of it than if you don't nap, because you might get more crits. That's assuming that you get a crit every day, which isn't always guaranteed, especially if you have a less powerful Mimikyu. But when it does crit, it produces triple the number of berries. And I don't remember the exact percentage that it is to crit. We actually don't know for sure, because that wasn't data mineable. But I know there was a research done by a lot of the members of the community. I think it came out to roughly 17.5%. It was definitely between 10 and 20%, I feel. But if I'm wrong, somebody please correct me in the comments. And I'd love to go find that information somewhere else. But either way, it's a very interesting mechanic on it. So that's and what it gives over its competitor for the Berry Burst skill being Braviary. But the skill is designed in a very bizarre way, in that it's kind of trying to produce raw strength. So we might think of it as comparable to Ampharos, Golduck, or Sudowoodo in terms of just producing raw strength. But also it's producing a lot of berries, so we might compare it to Banette or Gengar for ghost berry production. So, what really is the comparison here? And as you can see, it's a little bit, well, if I have Ghost Berry enabled, it's actually a little bit stronger than Banette for berry production. and definitely stronger than Gengar for berry production. But it shows up this way in the production simulation. But there's something very notable about this. Now, compared to its competitor for Berry Burst, the other option being Braviary, it is technically better, even with Favored Berry. Without Favored Berry, it's still technically slightly better, but Mimikyu is a 16-pit Pokemon, Braviary is not. So I think that is fair and balanced. And also part of it is Mimikyu can crit, Braviary cannot. Once the Mimikyu crits, it has less staying power until you take another nap or you get another full sleep session in. So there's some interesting strategy implications there as well. After this guy crits, if you get the crit out of it, then it's theoretically going to be stronger to be running a Braviary, but you probably don't have one of each with equal sub-skills in nature, and you're probably only investing in one because skill specialists are pretty expensive with main skill seeds and all. So, that's kind of where it is in that comparison. Now, compared to the Ampharos, Golduck, or Sudowoodo, as you can see, these guys do way better than the Mimikyu when it doesn't have Favored Berry, but when it does, they're obviously losing. So it functions more kind of like a berry specialist, which is where this Banette Mimikyu comparison comes from. But this really isn't giving the Banette a fair chance because in production comparison, and without Favored Berry, it's not giving these guys a fair chance because without in the production comparison, it's assuming that all 41 berries that the Mimikyu is producing are Ghost-type berries coming from the Mimikyu. But in reality, that's not going to be the situation. So realistically, it's a Pokemon that you need to use the team analysis function to really get a full picture of the strength that it's providing. Now, if we just compare this Mimikyu to this Ampharos, this is comparing when it has Favored Berry on what I would consider a kind of reasonable team. You can see that the Mimikyu does come out weaker, but it's a lot closer than the comparison and production comparison when you have it with the full team context and you account for if you have like a full team of Favored Berry specialists. And if you get a full team of level 60 Favored Berry Pokemon, full team of level 60, then you can see that even without the Mimikyu having Favored Berry, it's very close to the Ampharos. Within 2,000 off of 54,000, that's like roughly 4-ish% difference, which is pretty minimal. So it can fill the role of generalist, while also being very good at producing Ghost Berries. Now, I also made the comparison of Ghost Berries to Banette. And if the rest of the team doesn't have Favored Berry, then like having relatively comparable stats in the Banette compared to this Mimikyu, you can see that the Mimikyu does come out to be a little bit worse. But it really is just going to come down to what stats you have on a Banette and what stats you have on a Mimikyu. But they both are viable options for your Ghost Berry specialist or for an OGPP Ghost or Berry specialist, even though Mimikyu is a skill specialist at heart. But the real interesting comparison, though, is that, sure, level 60 the Mimikyu can kind of come close to producing the same amount as an Ampharos. But if I was just to take this down to like half the level, make it level 30 instead, you're looking at 36,000 on the Mimikyu versus this Ampharos is going to be still producing like 43,000. Which is a bit more of a difference, quite a bit more of a difference, because primarily they gain their value from their skill on a charge strength skill specialist. But with Mimikyu, it is like the one, Mimikyu and Braviary both, they're like the two Pokemon in this game that want both skill levels and main levels, and Pokemon levels, because they rely very heavily on the strength of their berry, as well as the level of their skill to get more berries. So it's a very, I feel it is a very, very late game Pokemon, and currently it doesn't really see that much meta usage. However, I could see if they add another skill level to Berry Burst, because, you know, right now it only goes up to level 60, or level 6. If they add another skill level to this, then it's theoretically going to be way better than its comparative berry specialists at producing berries. If they if they just increase the level cap, that alone is going to make it better comparative to other charge strength specialists. I think this guy is primarily limited by the level 60 level cap that's currently in place in the game. And that once we see higher levels, like level 75, eventually level 100, I think a level 100 Mimikyu could potentially be one of the strongest Pokemon in the game. Now that is all speculative, but I think the potential is there, especially if they add more skill levels. Because the theory is if they keep adding more if they keep adding more Pokemon levels, to keep skill specialist balanced, they're likely going to add skill levels as well. And if they do that, this guy scales on both. The thing about costing both is that it also scales on both. Whereas a regular skill specialist is really only going to be scaling on skill level, and a regular berry specialist is really only going to be scaling on level. This guy's going to have the multiplication of both those things scaling with it. So I think all Berry Burst Pokemon have a phenomenal potential for late game play. Now, I do like to touch on ingredients as well, and ingredient synergy on most Pokemon, even if they're not. Don't hunt a Mimikyu for its ingredients list, but I do like to make note of it. It's got apples, which is interesting because a lot of late game meals have apples, especially it's got good synergy with mushrooms and coffee in its list. I would love to see an ingredient specialist with this spread. Because Zing Zap Spice Cola has got apples and coffee, which could be kind of interesting, especially paired with like a Raichu and something for leaks, or a couple Raichus and something for leaks at the old gold power plant. That could be very, very powerful. If you get like an ABB Mimikyu and it, like a lot of speed, produces a decent amount of coffee for you, you probably stockpile and do very, very well with this Zing Zap Spice Cola at the old gold power plant specifically. But that's really all that's kind of there for that list. But additionally, there is the mushrooms, which I always do like to point out that Neroli's Restorative Tea is right here, pretty synergistic. It's a bit more of a lower meal, but it's easy to make, especially if you have the right spread. So I think those are like the most notable things. Very dessert Pokemon. Very, very dessert focused Pokemon. But it's interesting. I think it's got some nice synergy, and that's pretty useful, especially on a Pokemon that's not pulling in that many ingredients. Allows it to give a bit more coverage. If you want to hunt Mimikyu, the only options are Green Grass and Old Gold Power Plant, which really means the only option is Old Gold Power Plant, because if you're trying to hunt something at Green Grass, you're not going to actually catch it. There's way too many spawns there for you to effectively hunt something. So you want to go to the Old Gold Power Plant, and that is pretty much the only place to go if you want to catch a good Mimikyu. So, also do note, it being a ghost type, it usually is boosted for Halloween, so maybe be seasonal with it. Next Halloween, be planning to go to the Old Gold Power Plant if you want to catch this guy, because it's got very, very powerful late game potential. Anyway, if you have enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe, especially if you learned something. You can feel free to join us in the Discord that I just recently launched a week or two ago. We have great discussions in there, and I'd love to have more people. So, yeah, as always, I thank you guys for watching and hope that you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye now.